Hello, NAAIA community. Get ready to relive insightful discussions, gain fresh perspectives, and be inspired by the wealth of knowledge our community has to offer. Let's dive into another episode.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. Listen, I'm thrilled to have you join us today, but I know will be an incredible program, leading with pride and empowering our community. This event is a pivotal moment in our continuous journey, not only to foster growth and innovation and inclusivity within our industry, but to make us all become the better people that we all strive to be. At NAAIA, our unwavering commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is the cornerstone of our operations. Today's program is a powerful testament to our dedication to these principles. The world is changing faster than we ever imagined possible, and it's incumbent upon us to change with it. We must be a beacon of hope for all underrepresented and marginalized communities. Understanding and embracing the unique challenges and opportunities faced by the LGBTQ plus community within the insurance industry, it isn't just beneficial, it's essential. It's a business imperative. Today's event is about empowering each of us to lead with pride and confidence by embracing the richness of varied experiences, backgrounds, and viewpoints. We can fuel innovation, we can propel our industry forward, and more importantly, we can better serve our communities. Your unique insights and aspirations are invaluable, and it's this diversity that makes our industry stronger and more resilient. I urge each of you to be the driving force for positive change, challenging the status quo and pushing our industry to adopt more inclusive practices. As we navigate an increasingly interconnected global landscape, your perspectives are not just advantageous, they're indispensable. So before we embark on today's program, I want to take a moment to express my deep appreciation for the hard work of everyone involved in putting this event together. It's been, a labor of love, and we're really proud to present to you today. But a special thanks will go to our esteemed guest speaker, Mr. James Felton Keith, CEO of InclusionScore and Professor of Diversity Inclusion Service Management at the University of Georgia. Our moderator will be Omari Aarons Martin. He's the Executive Director and Chief Operator of NAAIA National. And yeah, he's my boss. And together, they will guide us through an insightful discussion and share best practices on fostering an inclusive workplace culture, effectively serving an increasingly intersectional customer base, and simply being the change we see. To quote Dr. King, we ain't what we ought to be, we ain't what we want to be, we ain't what we gonna be, but thank God, we ain't what we was. And with that, I'm excited to welcome James Felton Keith. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Am I off mute? Oh yeah, I am. I love that King quote. I hadn't heard that one in that way, but it reminds me of the, I guess, incrementalism that I'm normally arguing with younger people about, and the sense of urgency that they have about the change that they want to see in the modern world. And I'm with them, but as I age a bit, and I should say I'm used to feeling like a 12-year-old in most rooms. I work with mostly 70-year-olds every day as I work, in insurance, like the majority of you. And while 70 is the new 30, I guess that makes every 30-year-old negative 10 years old. But the point is, I'm regularly talking about incrementalism and how bureaucracy, how corporate change management, as boring as those subjects might sound, really cater to our gradual progress, or again, to Kevin's MLK quote, how we formally and methodologically and even mechanically bend our moral arc towards justice. So yeah, I love that quote. And it reminds me of the work that we do here. I like to always remind people when we talk about insurance, when we talk about risk management, that that we secure life and property. So, as the economist in the room, my background is mechanical engineering and macroeconomics. I'm regularly, reminding people who are disenchanted with the industry, who are disenchanted with corporate world in general, that on the heels of all of the marching in the street that we might see, as it is Pride Month, I'm here in New York, we think about, people getting ready to march in the streets. The mechanical work, the corporate work that happens behind that is often work that people like us in the industry do as we try to, again, secure life and secure property. I know there are a lot of skeptics about how we do that and why we do that and the price that we put on life and property. But as the economic nerds in the room, I am regularly reminded that the invent of property and the pricing of it, even though that there have been huge hiccups along the way, more than hiccups, outright moral atrocities when I think about the transatlantic slave trade and so many other things, property itself, adjacent to life, I think has been the primary catalyst for inclusivity across the board. I think that, and I'd love to, further this conversation and take any thoughts or comments that the people online see. I'm seeing folks in the chat come in from Indiana and South Carolina and Atlanta and Boston and wow, Philly. But as we think about, how we actually implement the change that we want to see, how we, as Dr. King said and Kevin referenced, move away from what we were. I think the incentives to do that are something that we keep prodding away at in the insurance industry. And I think that putting a price on harms done to either life or property that individuals or lives own is the best disincentive for bad acting in a given society, no matter where we are, whether we're here in the US, whether in Europe or Latin America or Africa or South or East Asia. What I've found in my work at InclusionScore and before that is the incremental identification of incentives. This is going to be a long sentence. Has disincentivized conservative activity everywhere. Now, I don't mean to attack, conservatism at its core. I'm not talking about even political beliefs specifically, but I am thinking about conservatism from a sociocultural standpoint and how we include people in the normal economy. Every economy that we've left behind, every social reality that we left behind, whether it be MLK's or the social realities before that, business and the incentive to include more people in the normal economy have been the main incentive to draw moderates and more progressive folk together. I think, without politicizing these particular terms, that humans, that the society that we exist in is inherently progressive. I think there's plenty of empirical evidence that shows how we've scaled into our modern time from where we used to be. Again, just based on the incentives of property and life. I think at our core, we want to secure life, as many as we can. I think we want to honor people's intrinsic value. I think we want to note that value is derived from our interaction with each other. And last but not least, I think that we want to ensure that people have some equity in the value that proliferates from our interaction in the hotly dense places that we interact. I think when we think about the most valuable places on the planet, it's not really specific to land anymore. It's specific to population density. When we look at the most profitable or impactful or inclusive or safest even places to live, they are often the most dense places to live. The statistics just confirm that, whether we're talking about the New Yorks or the LAs or Chicagos or Bostons or even Atlanta or Houston. When we think about these places, shout out to Philly, when we think about these places, what's really happening in those places are people are bouncing up their cultural differences against each other. They're transacting value, they're transacting data. And as they transact data about their lives, the business world wants to know how they live their lives so that we can plan as a broader society, and our industry is responsible for pricing that, so that we can plan to be here tomorrow. I think when we meet people, when we meet humans in their worst place, in their most aggressive, exclusive, xenophobic spaces, I think ultimately we need to give them some grace and acknowledge that they're just fearful, that they don't have enough resources to exist tomorrow. And humans, or individuals at least, are notoriously bad at gauging how much capacity they have to exist tomorrow. And so we as an industry have to incentivize more community to prop up around individuals to help them understand how we can coexist safely tomorrow. So I'm excited to be here, excited to speak to you all, excited to speak to Omari today. But again, just as an insurance professional, I try to remind everyone of the very human piece of the industry, even though I know that when most of us are introduced to insurance, at least how I was around 16, when I got my first car, which was a 1986 Ford Tempo, and I had to get no-fault insurance. My immediate reaction to insurance was, this is BS. I don't want to pay these people for nothing, right? It's how I looked at it. But again, as we get more skin in the game and as we age into the normal society, I think it is necessary to think about the fact that we are the people who incentivize the securitization of life and property. And I think we could help ourselves by being a bit more, if I may use this word, evangelical about securing life and property as we try to communicate to lay people who are not familiar with our industry, or new or young people who might be looking for a place to work or an industry to come to. I think it's necessary to communicate to them the very human aspect of the work that we do here. And I look forward to talking more about, how I've woven insurance into my work in DEI and bureaucracy and standards creation, but also just broader activism. I think I'm rarely in the streets, not rarely, regularly in the streets, wearing the soles of my shoes down. But I know that after a lot of those protests are over, I'm bringing it back to the office to figure out how we weave the social sentiment into financial products that, again, help with our core mission, which is securing life and property. So thank you all for having me. Thanks, Kevin, for the introduction. And yeah, happy to be here. I'm a little blind, so let me see who's been writing what in this chat. Oh, I've been to Conyers, Georgia. Anyway, yeah. Was that a bit overly philosophical? I could have told some jokes, but I didn't know where y'all went.
We'll do comedy hour with James Felton Keith another time. So maybe another incentive for folks to come to the national conference and see us in action there.
Do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for what I loved about you just outlining for us, particularly the global context around insurance and even your framework on protecting lives and protecting property, I think is so key. In the way we really think about our work as very mission driven, which is something that shows up now as one of the top concerns that people have in terms of the work that they're looking for, is they want their work to be valuable. And not just thinking about millennials, but even the Gen Z, it matters even more to their generations and generations coming in the future. So, we've been running with this tagline of insurance is sexy. And I'm like, I wonder if we should really run with the tagline of like, insurance matters, right? And that it is protecting life and it's protecting property and the things that people care about most.
I think it's both. I mean, it's definitely sexy if you don't want to be, destitute, right? You want a recession-proof industry. I think that's one argument to young people. I was here in Harlem a few weeks ago at a high school, all-boys school that was founded by our current superintendent called Eagle Academy. They got 3 throughout the city. And I was telling these kids I was in insurance, and I was standing next to like this lawyer who owns the Source magazine and this other advertising guy who was like, cool. And I asked them, did they know what industry Warren Buffett was in? And they couldn't tell me. I was like, Warren Buffett is in insurance and has used his insurance cash flow to buy everything else that I talked about the Geico Gecko, and they're like, get out of here. I'm like, that is low key Warren Buffett. So I do think it's sexy, but for the 25-year-olds, not the 15-year-olds, who, you're right, that's Gen Z, they think we're outdated, which is crazy, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I would say a Gen Z person told me and my husband the other week, there's like, I know when I see a millennial because their pants are too tight. And apparently Gen Z likes it looser, but whatever, we'll get to that. The point is, to them who want to care about the mission of the work that they're doing, whether they're at a big carrier or they're an independent broker, or they're somewhere in the middle, telling them that this business is about securing life and property, and it keeps the world going round, is I think omni-important. So yeah, tell them that it matters, and always reminding them when they just thinking, I'm just making a copy or sending an email, that it really goes into the bottom line work of securing life or protecting property. I think that's a great way to keep them on deck, keep them employed, keep them from running away to the next industry. This is very mission driven. And we as Black folk, and especially Black queer folk are, which is why I love the work that NAAIA is doing. I've, seen it sprawl over the past, few years. And, people might feel how they will about this, but we should talk about it. We always end up doing the groundwork of whatever the global cultural revolution is. We are the whistleblowers for what is happening in the most diverse integrated space on the planet. And that has real effects because our multinational companies, they're in India, they're in China, they're in South Africa, they're in Brazil, they're in Mexico, they're in the EU. And the way Black people interact with corporate world to secure life and property, it has ripple effects everywhere. So we should take this work in particular seriously, because it is as essential as whatever people do in the streets every day when they're marching with their fists in the air. Ours are just on the keyboard. So yeah, I believe that, really.
I love that. I love that. And I would echo that. You got me wanting to jump around a few of our questions here.
Let me stay on topic.
You ready to just dive in and do it, which is great. I love what Willa Renee put in the chat, insurance, the sexy that matters.
Oh,
so maybe that'll be our tagline. Maybe I don't know, Jeff to create an exhibit. And so we'll get on that.
yeah.
I will say, and it might be a perfect segue to talk a little about Huey P. Newton as well. You reminded me of that, so we'll go there in just a second. What I was thinking about as well when you were talking at the beginning, and I didn't have this in the notes ahead, is the Underwriting Souls exhibit that examines the archives from Lloyd's of London. That was sponsored by the Mellon Foundation and Johns Hopkins University. If folks have not checked that out, it is an online interactive exhibit that examines what happened in the transatlantic slave trade in terms of insuring Black bodies and how the insurance industry made money off of that. And so the exhibit is really powerful to go and take a look at. So if you've not checked that out yet, it's underwritingsouls.org. At some point, I will drop that in the chat as well for us to be able to look at. Before we go to Brother Huey, let me ask you kind of this broader question around, like, as we wrestle with our identities and particularly the intersection of being in this case Black and LGBTQIA plus. I think often about, we talk about creating environments of inclusion and belonging and having representation from every type of diversity dimension and being open and welcoming to all, which is kind of the end state goal and outcome of all the work that we are doing around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, liberation, and justice. What does inclusion look like for members of the LGBTQIA plus community? And what does that look like in insurance, in our industry, in the conferences we go to, in our everyday workplaces? How would you define, what would be the markers of, if we were to say, here's the standard of what inclusion looks like? What would that be?
I mean, look, that's a good one. That's a broad one. But I mean, look, you represent it in part, right, in your role. When I first saw what you were doing with NAAIA, I was like, oh my God, look at this. After digging around, like, let me Google this, brother, right? But I think obviously I'm a little dressed down today. I'm trying to chill, like, just a bit. But you're right. Normally I'm a gray suit or a blue suit. I got a couple of Blacks in there, but to be non-aggressive or to be professional, which is rooted in classism, I got about 14 blue suits and about 6 gray suits in rotation. I've been able to use them a little bit better since the pandemic. And that is really a proxy of us conforming, right? I think for the people in the broader LGBTQIA plus community, or as the French say, the LGBTQ community, as they present more femme, right? I think they're in more danger and less available to come out and be out. look, we can't really sugarcoat that insurance is arguably the most conservative industry out there. But while not being overly apologist, in its defense, I would say it's also the oldest industry out there. I know if you ask most people what's the oldest industry in the world, they'll tell you some form of sex work. But I think before any of that was allowed, two old men, it was likely two old men in some neighborhood somewhere in Europe, they let it happen because maybe there was a market demand for it. So that's capitalism superseding conservatism again. And when we think about that, I think per your question about what's the standard of what it looks like, I think it's constantly evolving, but I think a step forward would be at the Blackest or the most, Latino or the women's groups or the Asian groups, et cetera, at those groups, but obviously NAAIA leading. When I look at other minority professional associations in the industry, we're the biggest. I just say we as a member of the new member of the New York chapter. But the point is, I think it incrementally seeing people being able to show up more authentically in at least our spaces is progress. But more importantly than that, being able to see people come to work, and be more authentic, is progress. I think the standard right now is first being able to identify. And the way that we factor that in is by creating affinity groups and employee resource groups, et cetera, at every company, no matter how large or small it is. I mean, obviously, more than 20 employees. If you're under that, you probably don't need all this infrastructure, if I'm being honest. But having those, I wouldn't call them safe spaces. We're not in a safe space. We're not safe right now. I'm here. I might say something crazy in 5 minutes. But, nothing is as safe as when you're in your bedroom or in the bathroom. But we want relatively safe spaces for people to identify themselves because we need to know who they are in order to, again, insure those lives and property. So insurance, as industry participants, building out infrastructure, and those means those employee or affinity groups for people to corral in and identify in, will help not only our industry and our spaces become more inclusive over time, but also our clients. We got to remember, insurance is the most powerful engine on the planet because everybody is our client. And every time that there's a grievance, somebody pulled your hair, somebody talked about your skin color, somebody talked about your dress, somebody talked about your wheelchair, whatever. If a grievance turns into a claim, we pay it. And it's everything, every grievance that gets settled is a claim. So I would say best practice looks like next year at NAAIA National, more people showing up wholly as themselves. And that don't mean y'all got to be bad with fashion. I don't mean you got to wear no socks if no socks don't go with your shoes, get it right. But, also be you, So, I think every next year is the next standard. What I saw last year, I was in Columbus and it looked different from, I had been to a NAAIA event a decade ago and it didn't look like it did in Columbus, i.e. I was there. So I think each year gives us an opportunity to be incrementally better. But again, how we structure spaces and breakout events for people to identify and exist in our spaces, both at the companies and at the conferences, is what best practices would look like. And I think, again, you all lead with that, with this event, but also all the Latino Americans and Asian Americans, et cetera, who are part of NAAIA. Yeah. They need to have a little sidebar, a little side cocktail hour at NAAIA. And I'm not saying they need to come and radically transform all of the African and American stuff that's going on, but we need to know who they are, that they exist, and try to figure out how do we help them build more infrastructure. But again, as Black folks, we're likely always going to be at the center of trying to supply resources to the marginalized. Unfortunately, that's our role. Last thing I'll say about that really quick, someone asked me the other day, like, when do we get to be free? When do we get to, I was like, what if I told you, never, what if I told you you always got to be the little brother? It's only 40 million of us, only 20 million of us are above 18 years old. So if we're always the whistleblower or the little bro, we definitely need to take our time out and, drink our water and take a nap. But we have to leverage our institutions, this one in particular, to always be the core whistleblower and the foundation of whatever inclusivity means tomorrow. So I think we're being the best practice right now. So.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that has always made me really proud about NAAIA's history, and I think in many ways similar to the Urban League, the NAACP, National Black MBA Association, right, is because of the dynamics that we've had, particularly from an American context, right? When we've talked about diversity, we've really only talked about diversity historically in the context of women from a gender standpoint and Blacks and African Americans from a racial standpoint.
Yep.
And so many of the resources and attention were given to women's organizations and Black organizations, and probably more attention than resources. But that has put us in a position to be the people with the loudspeaker, right? And something Gerald Tillman said, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years ago now, around NAAIA being the soul and consciousness of the insurance industry. And that's stuck with me in terms of the work that we do throughout our partner network, throughout all of our members and our chapter network as well, of knowing that we have that responsibility, and that responsibility is both a burden and a privilege for us to have that. So yeah, I think that's 1000% spot on.
It is. It can burn us too. You know, I mean, being a loud voice with the megaphone, it can hurt. I've had a few setbacks over the years, but anyway, but he's right. Gerald's totally right. Yeah.
The attention is not always good attention. No. So but I'm really proud of the way that we've been able to leverage it and continue to push, and that we've got something I said to someone the other day. This is how I know some of these things just come. It's not me being brilliant. It's like I don't know if it's the Holy Spirit or the universe. I said we're more than an organization. We're really a movement, and we recognize we have a lot of partners in the movement. It takes all of us to really make this thing work. So we're really proud of that. You reminded me of this speech that Huey Newton did in 1970. And I had not been aware of it. And so if you're not aware of it, you should Google it. And what he said in the speech was he was calling for the women's liberation movement and what was known at that time as the gay liberation movement to really join forces with, at the time, the leading Black liberation organizations, not just the Black Panther Party that he was the co-founder of, but really all the folks who were sitting at the table and who had voice, and said, really our collective power together is what's going to create this massive movement of social change and be the progress for all of us. So rather than us doing it in pockets, where is the space to come forward and do some coalition building? And there's like a line or two in there I wanted to read you and just get your reaction to them. He wrote, or he said, when we have revolutionary conferences, rallies, and demonstrations, there should be full participation of the gay liberation movement and the women's liberation movement. Some groups might be more revolutionary than others, but we should not use the actions of a few to say that all are reactionary or counter-revolutionary, because they are not. What I loved about something he said in the speech, he was talking about being a revolutionary, and at the time, this is the language, just as a call out for folks, of being a revolutionary homosexual. And really pointing to, there were folks in the movement and on the ground who were doing things that were considered really outlandish and very out of what was appropriate behavior in terms of doing protest.
Respectability.
I'm curious from your perspective, what does it mean to be a revolutionary person, right? Whatever your whichever identities you're carrying, right? Whether that's a revolutionary Black person, a revolutionary woman, a revolutionary member of the LGBTQ community. I love that. I'm totally stealing that. Right? Like, what does it mean for us to be revolutionary in 2024 and forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, it means we're always on the edge. I was talking to Charles Blow, who was a frat brother of mine, who wrote this great book, also inspired by Huey, called The Devil We Know. And it was basically asking Black folks to move back to the South. I'm originally from Detroit. My people came from Noonan, Georgia, Shreveport, Louisiana, through Chicago and Detroit. And it's like, not everyone should move back to like coalesce some political power that exists. And I was like, well, as a LGBTQ, I was like, I require some of the core infrastructure that New York has. Like, I moved to New York for a reason. I'm a refugee of Detroit. I'm from a older Detroit than the Detroit that people know now, where they talk about it's coming back and it's doing sexy things, and it is. I can dig it, but I live in Harlem for a reason. But what I would say is it puts you on the edge. Now, as you age, you know, I remember being with, and number one, Huey's my favorite activist from that era, but I really think he was taking a page out of Malcolm X's book, Post Mecca. Like when Malcolm X came back in the mid 60s and he saw European Muslims and he saw African Muslims and he saw other folks, and he realized how expansive his faith was. He came back to the civil rights movement and the cadre of participants, whether it was King and other folks who were participating. And he was like, we need a movement for human rights. He was really the first right here in this neighborhood. My office is on Malcolm X Boulevard. And he asked for a movement around human rights more broadly than civil rights, because he understood the value of bringing in a motley crew, if you will, group of participants, which is exactly what we're doing here with NAAIA. Now, fast forward into my life, I'm an 81 baby. So me and Beyonce and Britney Spears are the oldest millennials ever, right? We'll be 43 this year. When I was 30, I was one of those kids sleeping at Occupy Wall Street. And I got to meet with Kathleen Cleaver. If people are not familiar, she's the only woman to run the Panthers. She was teaching law at Yale at the time, and we'd go back and forth, mainly to party at Yale. It wasn't, we wasn't there with hats and leather, berets and kufis on. We was just hollering at Kathleen because she would kick it at a coffee shop. But she was like, what I don't like about you all's revolution is it doesn't have any teeth. And we got things done because we were a threat. And I was like, well, I think we've moved. I think the yardstick has moved because of the work that you all have done. And what we want to do is cut the head off the snake. We want to decentralize so that someone like Huey can't be put in jail for a decade and it have a real hindrance on the movement. And the whole objective of Occupy was a decentralization of everything, which is what we've seen with BLM, which is what we've seen with the women's movement, which is what we've seen with LGBT rights, which is what we've seen with climate change, which is what we've seen with so many things. We've seen it as a model, more than 10 years later. And so what I would say is, while some of our brothers and sisters and people of trans experience are on the bleeding edge of activism and ringing the bell about what hurts in their life, I think some of us who are more in the middle, some of the suits, when I hear your question, and I'm not sure if this is what you were asking, I'm thinking, what does it mean to care, to be an activist in a suit? Because people sometimes see me online, they're like, you don't really care, you a suit dude. And I'm like, I care, but what I want to do after we have the vigorous discussion is want to figure out what we can get done. What can I get you incrementally to give you, right? So I think my reaction to all the old work that all the folks did in the 60s, 70s, and 2000s and 2010s, you name it, is I'm still constantly thinking of how can I participate. While I was talking to my friend who started Black Lives Matter of Greater New York here in New York, in the Bronx, and he's 46, and he was like, I'm not marching no more, but I'll show up for strategic events. I was like, I'm with you. My feet hurt a little bit. I can help you raise money. I can do different things. I can bring the insurance industry to you. I got this proclamation from the mayor because we do this Juneteenth march in Central Park. A lot of my friends don't like the mayor of New York for a variety of reasons, but I still had to get something done. I had to move a demonstration we were doing uptown into Central Park so we could have everybody participate. And so sometimes you got people that they might not be your best friends, but you need to do the work with them to get things done. And I think that's a testament to Americana. It's a testament to what it feels like to be in the risk management industry. And I think it is our job as the 81 babies and everybody on down to continue to carry that torch, even while the kids tell us that our pants are too tight, which is, again, in my opinion, ridiculous, because you work hard to have, to be able to wear them that tight. I'm kidding. My pants ain't really that tight, but I get what Gen Z is saying. I get what they're saying.
There's a reality of having some tailored clothes, right? Like when you can afford to go to the tailor, and not just do your express suit, which was what was really big when I was in college, right? So
I've been working for 20 years for this suit, so let me live. Anyway,
I do think, and you mentioned Black Lives Matter. I think it's really interesting to me that Black Lives Matter was created and led by queer folks and mostly queer women of color, and queer Black women
yep.
specifically. And I think a significant part of their power came from embracing their intersectional identity, right? They
Totally.
didn't shy away from being a queer person or their queer identities, and they didn't shy away from their Blackness.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways really said these two things can coexist. We are examples of this. And the issues that are impacting me are impacting all of us. And so we're willing to step forward. We've got two questions that came in. And I think this leads really well to Jason Clayton's question. Jason's on our board for the NAAIA Metro DC chapter, in addition to serving several other roles in the industry. And what he wrote here was feeling like the Black community, especially in religious and Afro-Caribbean circles, is not supportive, if not hostile, of the queer community, even though the Black queer community has had significant contributions to all aspects of American culture. I've heard it said that the lowest rung in our businesses and communities is Black, female, queer. What
And
can
disabled,
Black,
yes.
disabled is in there too.
Yeah.
What can Black professionals and our allies do to foster more acceptance within Black and professional communities?
Look, as the process engineer, as the mechanical guy in the room, I'm gonna say, and I've had to learn this the hard way over time, we have to keep showing up and telling our stories, right? The most extraordinary institutions in our community or any other community, and let's just think about, the Black church, for instance, is the institution of storytelling. And the more we've told our stories to that institution, to those institutions, through those institutions, the more they've been available to hear us, see us, love us, etc. And the unfortunate reality to that, and it's what people usually don't want to hear, is that that's going to take a little bit of time, But like I remember when I ran for Congress, I had it out with, I'm a Kappa, I had it out with my fraternity about a list of names that I wanted to fundraise from. And this grand old pastor in my neighborhood, who just passed away actually, who used to run Abyssinian Baptist Church, kind of stood in my way. Like, this dude is the devil, which I, of course, am not. I'm just little old me. And so we had it out about who does what in the community. And I was sort of on the edge of going to my internet properties. I got a bunch of blue checks. So sometimes when I say stuff, it gets a little bit too much attention. I just want to call out the frat about a lot of things. And a bunch of frat brothers came to me and they were like, bro, I'm telling you, you can do more good by continuing to participate and come to the events and show us how your life really is versus what we all think it is, than ringing the bell and calling us out and get a couple people, hurt from that early on. He's like, but we'll be here and we'll still need someone to hack the institution. And so I have become a lot more patient over the years, but I wasn't earlier. So to answer your question, I think, again, we have to continue to participate. Amari's a pastor. I think that speaks volume. Volumes, it moves weight. We're not where we were, again, as Kevin said earlier, 10 years, 20 years. I remember, anyway, we're not where we were, but we have to continue to tell stories, tell our story in particular, and get better at telling it. Because sometimes we're telling stories and we're like, why is nobody listening? Sometimes you're not good at that. So you need to go back to work as an accountant or actuary or whatever. But do tell the storytellers your story and they might do a better job at doing your part. We have to professionalize how we represent ourselves and let the people who are good at the thing be good at the thing, So
I like that.
Yeah.
One of the things I was fond of saying as a ERG leaders is that ERG leaders are and I'm sorry, just a employee resource group. I say ERGs like everybody knows what that means in every conversation. Right. One of the things I was always fond of saying about employee resource group leaders and business resource group leaders as well is that we are guardians of people's stories.
Yeah.
And one of the other aspects of doing that role is, we think about the job description of an ERG leader in an organization. One of the other aspects of that role that's not often in the job description is people come and tell you stories all the time about how the value proposition is failing for them, and what's happening in their workspaces and ways that the company can be better. And what I always found is it was often the people who were like, I I don't have access to be in the same room that you're in. I don't
Okay.
necessarily want to be the person in the room that you're in. So I'm
Right.
giving you this story because you're in that room, you're in that conversation, you have access to the people. And we always had to be really selective about where did you share that story so that it could be most impactful and not potentially cause damages to other people.
Yeah.
Our other question in the chat is from Janelle Holmes, who's president of our Greater Kansas City chapter. And she's asking about ERGs and what is their role in organizations? Do we need ERGs? What do we say to people who say that they're
Yes.
glorified committees that just have food days and do culture celebrations? What's the real value? And
Sure.
yeah, what do you
So
think about ERGs?
so they are all those things. They do those things, and we need those so that we can extract the stories. So I guess for anyone who's not wholly familiar with my background, what I'm doing at Inclusion Score, so we productize via insurance technology the new international standards. There's a new international standard for diversity and inclusion. It's called ISO 30415. And what it really is a business process to deliver infrastructure for inclusivity to any org. It's not saying that in every org, diversity inclusion looks exactly the same. And again, if all your employees are in Washington State, that's going to look different than how it might look in South Carolina, right? Two very different populations. Minorities mean something different. But what it does say is we do set the table of inclusion the same way. If we know ergonomically how dinner works best, even if you having one thing for dinner in your family and I have a different thing, we know where the soup spoon goes. We know where the salad fork should go. Sometimes you're not having salad. Let's call that supplier diversity. You're having a little smaller dinner. So we'll take that out right now. But ERGs are extremely important. They're the salt, if you will. And I don't care if you're like, I don't eat salt right now. I'm not eating sugar. I'm on a fast. It goes in everything. It makes it pop. And the reason that they are necessary, the reason that ERGs are necessary per the standard is they're the core infrastructure that institutions might extract information about the reality of a population within its ranks. And it really serves two purposes. No, they shouldn't be used to burn people out and treat them like they're in these nonprofit side jobs that they didn't want in the first place. But they do need to exist, and I'll give you an example. They do need to exist in order to validate D&I efforts and then hold them accountable. So for instance, I had a client who was a huge $2 billion water company in Texas called me the other week, like, we want you to do a talk. I do a lot of these in June, especially. This kid came out to him as gay. I'm like, okay, cool. He wants to join the LGBT chamber because he knows me. He's like, I like you, love Andy. That's my husband's name. He's like, we want to do some cool stuff. If you don't know, in my old world, I built out the LGBT Chamber of Commerce in Detroit, and Washington, and Scandinavia, and 3 in Africa, and a bunch of those. So I'm always an advocate for someone joining, but I was like, just like any other business process, you have to identify your customer. And your son don't work here, number one. So you might be wasting resources, number two. Number three, joining an LGBT chamber without having an LGBT employee resource group is like planning an International Women's Day event with no women on the panel to help you execute it. It's crass. It's also unethical, right? And it can get you into trouble. If I'm a woman at your company, or if I know a woman at your company, and this is where I'm bad, I'm gonna tell her to sue you. Now it's an insurance claim. When you see somebody like me come and just think you probably owe somebody some money. I get to talk crazy like this because everybody owed me some money, and I done got too big for people to tell me to shut up. No one says no to the queer Black dude from New York. So ERGs are important every time you launch an initiative to have in play. So they both validate, like if I'm the chief diversity officer at a company and I want to go to the management and say, we want to come to the Juneteenth march. And I can't go to, at the very least, the Black ERGs for them to validate, like, yeah, we like Juneteenth. You know, because as a white person, let's say I'm at the company, I don't really know. I don't know. I don't know how it goes, right? So we need them to validate it. Now, if the Black people come to me as Chief Inclusion Officer and say, we want to do the Juneteenth March, and we want to spend some money to recruit more kids from, let's say, HBCUs, you got to go to management and ask for the budget to do it. And management now, they're held accountable because they got to tell the people of the ERG that you represent, yay or nay, and why. Okay, we can't do it now, but we can do it in 2026. And here's why, because we have this larger Asian women's group that we already committed to do blah, blah, blah. We're doing some disability stuff. And now that y'all are organized, you're on the map. So you leverage the ERG to do that. And the international standard creates a framework to do that at every company with more than 100 employees. Because research says companies with less than that many employees, they all act like the CEO. So they might be cultureless. That's the main reason that they matter. It is possible that you all's company, you know, per the person who asked the question, might be using ERGs wrong, and they might be burning people out. The other thing I'll say is in states and countries where we're not allowed to collect demographic data as freely as we'd like to, you do not have to ask people on day one how many ovaries you have, how Black you feel, if you're neurodivergent, or if you're anything else uncomfortable. If you design that infrastructure, there's a place in the standard that asks, how long do you onboard people to your core DEI infrastructure, which suggests that you have some. If you put everybody into their corner, you can just count the heads. You don't need to ask people, are you gay? Because you kind of walk gay. You don't got to do that. Because then when the minute you say something as crass as that, and they call me, and now you're going to get sued, right? And that's another claim. So, and to be clear with you all, claims per the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission this year are up 30%. And they were up 20% last year. And over the past 20 years, they've been up between 5 to 7% every year until the pandemic, and they start exploding. And it's not just because people are more disgruntled than they used to be. It's because they're more aware than they used to be. And Gen Z is more on it than we were. And bless them for being so. So no, ERGs are good. They're absolutely necessary to understand who the employee body is. And if you have an ERG policy, like many companies do, and I'm thinking about some insurance companies that I know about, they state explicitly in their ERG policy that they don't want feedback. ERGs that cannot give adequate feedback loops to the business to understand how it should exist are putting themselves at more risk because people like me are hunting for it.
Yeah. I was just looking up while we were talking. I love everything you just said. There's it's Dr. Robert Rodriguez who created the 4C model for ERGs, which many of us use: culture, career, commerce, and community. There's a second part of the model that we don't often focus on, and it evaluates ERGs from kind of like an introductory level to what does it mean to get to a strategic level within your organization. And particularly since many companies just started employee resource groups, many of them are at that first level where the work that they're doing is primarily raising awareness of cultural celebrations and cultural holidays. Like they haven't made it into the integration with the talent practices side, looking at promotions, looking at data, employee resource group surveys, kind of that sort of thing, and becoming strategic advisors to the leadership within their organization, right? So, but that's the path, is really, you want the ERG to be able to function at all levels. We can come to the Pride Month program and have a good time, or we could go walk in the Pride Parade. That's cool. But then we got to look at parental leave policies, and we got to look at medical benefits for our trans employees and colleagues, right? So like there's other things that we need to be thinking about. But that comes with the coaching and leadership support for the leaders of the ERG on how they get into the room and how they start to make those moves. And leadership has to be open and encourage that, and not shut that out. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
man,
they should be interacting directly with the professional societies. You're right. That ERG should be reaching out, and then NAAIA should be insourcing service. But yes. And for the young people, it's a great way to climb up and get noticed, right? No one's noticing you in your cube or now on Zoom. but when you're part of those groups, you get to get plucked through leadership. So again, even if it's a 6-year effort to get established, right, or 10 or whatever, it is absolutely necessary before you push it through the fabric of the organization. Oh, go ahead. You were about to say something else. Yeah.
No, you're good. I'm always, every time we do this, and we always go back and forth on like, do we do them for an hour or 2 hours and all that with everybody's calendar?
Yeah, right.
We've got like 2 minutes left before I have to turn it over to Jeff to share about our upcoming events. I wanted to ask you, and you were talking about wearing the soles of your shoes down, pounding the pavement, being everywhere. In addition to June being Pride Month, and we're having our own Juneteenth celebration next week as well, June is also Men's Mental Health Month.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for you on, when you're not wearing the soles of your shoes down, how do you protect your peace? How do you unwind? Are there, in maybe a minute or less, are there things that you do or that you recommend, particularly to other leaders in general, and then specifically to other men, on how do we ensure that our health is in a good space, both mentally, physically, spiritually, all the above?
This question's always so hard because I mean, look, my camera's bad, but like I got some bags in it. You just
that's why I'm back here. That's so people can't see.
It's just the camera, but I mean, look, I sleep. I think it's the best medicine you can have. I do sleep 8 or more hours a night. But I mean, as a leader, I feel like I've tried to organize my life to provide me therapy back. I get to over-explain and over-talk to everybody around me. I think my husband's like, shut up, half the time. But I use everybody around me to talk about what's going on, what's on my mind. I sort of write to get things out, to go over how I might say something that I don't want to say. But last but not least, I go out, I go to a lot of comedy clubs. I got a lot of comedian friends and I try to use them. They keep me in line because the stuff they say for a laugh, I'm like, I couldn't say any of that. I'm trying to be right as I'm out here in the world. So, I mean, for my own mental health, again, I just try to rest. I'm not sure I'm managing it the best, even if it looks like that on the internet. But, I think what wakes me up every day, or in the middle of the day, if I have to take a nap in the middle of the day because I done gone crazy, is that it's still work to do. Like I am still obsessive about the lack of access that even I have to the world that I want to influence. And as a result, I'm upset about everybody else's. And so it keeps me walking, but it keeps my legs in decent enough shape where, if I wanted to wear, not that I do, those pants that Gen Z don't like, I think they will work. I think they will work on me. But I ain't wearing nothing crazy, because I still got to talk to like Swiss Re in the morning. So I can't do too much.
There we go. George will take care of you. Don't worry about it. So,
right. Yeah.
Oh, James, thank you so much for this conversation. One of the kind of my takeaways is our health journey, just like our inclusion journey, is a constant work in progress. Yes. And it's not a destination that we reach, but something that we all have to continually work toward and continue to focus on in order for us to make real progress. So thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for watching this flashback episode with NAAIA. We appreciate your time and hope you found the insights valuable. Stay tuned for more enriching content. Until next time, thank you for being a part of the NAAIA community.